Welcome to the Monday episode of the Dobbin and Bandits. I'm Orrin Phillips, and today we are talking to a fellow YouTuber. Yes, worlds collide. I'm talking to Dan Larson of the Secret Galaxy YouTube show. If you haven't seen it, I really highly recommend it. He talks about toys, comics, movies, cartoons, everything we love. He gives information about it to learn how these things came together. It's entertaining and it's educational in many ways, and that's sort of a hard combination to do. I had the pleasure of meeting Dan at a toy show. He was nice enough to come on and speak a little with us. So, without further ado, Mr. Dan Larson. Speaking to Dan Larson, the creator behind Secret Galaxy YouTube channel, which you all must check out. It's absolutely phenomenal. Dan, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate the warm welcome.
Well, let's start from the very beginning. Growing up, were you a comics kid, a toys kid, a little of both?
Both, very much both. Toys, like any kid, growing up in the late 70s into the 80s, that would have been just, natural for you to have all kinds of action figures and Star Wars toys and He-Man and G.I. Joe and all that stuff. Most kids had a tendency to grow out of that, but I didn't. That I stuck with it through today. It's still ongoing. And it became the thing that I enjoyed most. And that pairs very closely to my love for comics growing up. The earliest comics I can remember reading were comics that my mom had. And, I don't know where the line was between comics she was buying for herself because she was into that, or comics she was buying for my brother and I, she'd read them and then give them to us. I don't I don't know where that line was. But I ended up getting in with a group of friends who were very heavy into comics and just sort of fed each other and everybody, competing to have the longest run of X-Men back issues. Oh, I go back to 121. I have 115. My brother once touched a copy of X-Men 94, or X-Men 98, whatever. These things. And I was an avid collector of comics through trying to remember exactly which crossover finally broke me. I don't know if it was Siege or one of those around there where I was just like, you know what? I think it was the Secret Wars that happened around that, mid early 2000s kind of time period. Because I just got so tired of pouring money and my heart and investing the time into comics crossover events that were good, only to have the story get broken by the USA Today or something, where it was like, oh, and at the end of this happens, and here's the kickoff for the next thing. And I was like, great, there's 3 months down the toilet. you know. And then I honestly, for the longest time, I really wanted to be a comic book creator. I wanted to write my own comics. I wanted to draw my own comics. And just as fate would have it, that ended up turning into the channel. And I sort of had this moment one day where I was like, okay, I can either continue to try to pursue comics, or I can just sort of accept in a good way what, fate has sort of brought me to and go with the YouTube channel. And that's what it's been since April of 2015.
Is that itch still there though for
Oh
comics?
yeah, absolutely. 100%. 100%. It's tough because, doing the channel takes so much time and so much creative energy that there's just not a lot left at the end of that. And so I find myself in the position now where I'm turning to other artists and trying to lean on their abilities and say, okay, well, my love of comics and art and creation and narrative and all that stuff has me sort of in the role of art director on these projects. So this piece here, this print that's actually on the wall here, I did the line art for this years ago, and when I was looking for merch last year for a convention, I pulled that line art out, and this actually it used to have Captain America on here, and now it's Warduke. I swapped those out. So the Warduke I drew like last year, and then that image became the image for our T-shirts. And I reached out to my friend. You probably know Eric Canetti. He's done a lot of comics work
Sounds familiar.
over the years. Yeah, his most recent stuff was some alternate covers for the Skybound GI Joe
Okay.
books. But he's a friend of mine, and I asked him if he'd be interested in coloring this up for me, and so he colored it up, and that print is available in our merch store. But yeah, just updating that image of Warduke, I was like, man, I just once you sort of have that in your blood, it's very satisfying,
Mhm.
and it's a very low barrier to entry to get into a way to tell stories. It's just ink on paper, and you can you can in theory do it very easily, but it takes time, and that's what I don't have right now.
And jumping back to your youth, did you ever find that you were buying a comic book based on the toy or buying a toy based on the comic? And if so, which ones really stood out to you?
I don't know how frequently that happened. I think even at an early age, I could tell, what books were the books that were being produced to sell toys.
Right.
Marvel has a whole, archive full of books that were created specifically to partner with toys.
Mhm.
G.I. Joe and Transformers kind of in their own category. There's the others like Crystar and
Mhm.
Sectars and all these other things that were specifically done, to sell books.
Mhm.
DC was doing the same thing. Both of those companies had those really toy centric books. But I definitely liked characters across those two mediums. So, even though Marvel's Secret Wars was there as a marketing tool for the toy line,
Mhm.
it was a good book.
Right.
I really enjoyed that book at the time. And
Mhm.
Spider-Man, Wolverine, Captain America, those three guys have always been, key books, key characters that I would always come back to in toy form and in comic book form.
Let's talk about Secret Galaxy because when you start out, what's your blueprint for this? What is your idea of what you want, content that you want to put on, and how do you execute that idea?
So, Secret Galaxy is a two-person operation. It's myself and producer Greg.
Mhm.
It's been a 50-50 deal since the day we started almost 10 years ago now. And, Greg and I have been doing creative stuff for years before that as well, independent films and those kinds of things. There were actually a couple of comic book scripts that we wrote together that never turned into anything. But just sort of creative partnership. And so the way the responsibilities break out now is Greg is the sort of channel manager, the editor, the producer of the show, and so he'll sort of set the agenda as far as what we're going to be talking about, what topics we'll cover from week to week, and we'll consult each other on that from time to time. There have been times where he's just like, I don't know what we should do next. Do you have? Is there anything in particular you want to jump on? Anything you want to address? And so I'll contribute that. And so he'll sort of do an initial round of research and then hand it off to me. And so I take 3 days, usually every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I'm, head down as much as I can possibly be, just digging into whatever the topic is, and trying to sort of contextualize it and find an interesting narrative that even if you've never heard of this thing before, I can sort of take you on a little journey, introduce you to whatever this thing is and why are we even talking about this thing? Where does it fit into pop culture? Where does it fit into society? Why did it succeed or fail? Why is it perceived as being a success? But it's not. There's a lot of different perspectives on that. And then we'll shoot it on Thursday, and then Greg takes it back from there, edits it, turns it into something that, hopefully looks good on the other end.
I was about to say because it's such a nerdy little point, but when you do these shows, your cadence and the way you present the facts, I mean, it could be very other. I've seen other people do it, and it's very dry and very blah 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 blah. But you present it in an entertaining and humorous way at times that you find yourself drawn in, and you're learning as well, but you're also being entertained. How did you come up with your style?
So I've always sort of pictured it as, and this, I caught on to this pretty quickly. The sort of voice that I'm writing in is you're on the school bus and I'm on the school bus and I'm on my way to school and I just remembered my report is due today and I haven't done anything on it yet. So that's the sort of mindset I'm trying to be in. Like I want people to be able to connect with me very quickly. I want to be relatable. I want it to be informative, accurate, interesting, but also it's got to be entertaining because, like you said, it can get very dry very quickly. And a lot of these subjects just aren't very important. So it's like I need to sort of give it a little bit of reason for you to watch, but also make sure you're entertained. Our goal was always to keep in mind the other people who might be watching, people who don't actually care about Boba Fett or Wolverine or anything else, but they might sit around for an interesting story if they actually heard it or saw it if somebody else was watching. And that's really that sort of place I try to be. And it was very easy for me to get into that mindset because that's the story of, all my entire education. Oh crap, I forgot the report was due today.
And I mean the topics you pick. I mean, I'm a huge fan, as you can tell, of the show. But when research, because sometimes you guys dig into some obscure, cartoons or obscure toys. Where is information found for things like that? Because I mean, I know for us there's, Wikipedia, but how do you guys go about your research process?
So Wikipedia isn't all bad. It is a good sort of general outline. A lot of times it is written by people who do care. There are things to be careful about, of course, but that's not the end point, right? Like you can start from there, but you don't end there.
Mhm.
It's good. Everything's got to be double checked, right? Like you can't take any of that information at face value. So we'll always start there. Wikipedia is always in our sources in the video description because we list all our sources there, and then we just start digging. Greg will do sort of a general Google search, what's out there. A lot of the stuff we're covering is old, and so there's already a lot of coverage about it out there. People have been blogging about this stuff for years.
Mhm.
Thankfully, a lot of these creators, even on shows like your own here, a lot of these creators' stories, they've had the opportunity to tell these stories themselves. And so whenever we can, we will always try to go to the original source, find an interview with that person, find a podcast with that person, those creators, that voice actor, that director, that artist, whatever. Whenever we can go back to that original source, that's always best because I hate it when, and this has happened a couple times on some of our videos where there'll be something in Wikipedia, there'll be something on all kinds of news websites and stuff, a repeated fact
Mhm.
where they're all just referencing each other and it's wrong. It's just straight up wrong. And we've had to go and sort of reevaluate these things and say, oh, you know what? I'm glad we didn't take that at face value because it's not true.
Right.
you know? So we have a subscription to newspapers.com too. So we can always go back to, we love contemporaneous sources. If a show came out in 1985, we want to go back to 1985 and see what people were saying about it then.
And what's also wonderful about that is it kind of shines a light on those people who created these things and, the work they put into it that, it might be forgotten now, but you're bringing it back and letting folks know like, hey, maybe this is something you want to check out because
Absolutely.
this is what it was about.
Yeah, yeah, and we're on the verge of, some of these creators, a lot of these creators no longer being available. So it's important to get this stuff documented while we still can.
One thing I'm going to ask you about is because it's with comic books, it's kind of the waters have gotten muddy a bit as to who's done what facts are there for creating these books and stuff like that. How have you found it to be the same way that it's really getting harder in some aspects with these things to find out exactly who was behind? Because you see folks sometimes taking credit now for things and other folks jump out and say no, and then the internet kind of blows
Are you
up.
talking about Deadpool?
Well, one of many. We can go there or Wolverine or the
Yeah.
other,
Hey,
whatever
you know what?
topics.
Money changes the game, right? Like for years and years and years, nobody cared. It wasn't really a big deal. All of a sudden, all these tens of millions of dollars are getting thrown around, and I don't blame people for that. The stories are out there. You'll know the name probably better than me. I can't remember the creator, Rocket Raccoon, off the
Oh
top of
yes,
my
Bill
head, but
Manley.
Bill Mann, yeah. So
Yep.
he had, he was very ill, end of life, and there were a lot of people who were working very hard to make sure his name got on that film, on those Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and everything that Rocket Raccoon was in, to make sure he was getting paid, to make sure he was getting some kind of compensation at the end of his creative life,
Yep.
that he had something coming to him. And yeah, Deadpool, there's several creators who did a lot. There was, yes, there's the person who first put ink to paper and drew what he looked like. But then there was a writer involved, and then there was a letterer involved, and then that character that we know as Deadpool didn't really become Deadpool until years later when another writer and another artist. So it's like, yeah, where do you draw those lines as far as who gets credit for what?
Right.
The you can go all the way back to the beginning with Siegel and Schuster and Superman and those long, hard fought battles to get creator credit and compensation for their families, as far as DC and Warner Brothers
Yeah.
just wanting to keep all that.
Most definitely. Like you said, it's money is the become the giant factor because these properties have become franchises and there's a lot at stake with all that stuff.
Yeah, and they should get it. It
Mhm.
shouldn't, it's one thing if two writers, two artists, are sort of trying to figure out the percentage of, well, I should get 25%, you should get 40, and he should get 35 and whatever. That's one thing. But it's another thing when the company, the owners, the IP owners are saying, well, we get everything and you get nothing.
Right.
That's
That's a
not
big
that's not
problem.
fair.
No. What advice? how did you get your YouTube channel out there? Because it's hard to advertise things like that. What advice was it? Just word of mouth, and it kept growing and growing from there?
That's all it really was for us. Just the grind. And, it's hard to really say specifically what, there's no formula, right?
Right.
We tried to look at our genre at the time. We started out as Toy Galaxy, and we were Toy Galaxy up until about 2 years ago, and then we changed over to Secret Galaxy. And we took a survey of the landscape of what the our genre looked like and how people were making videos when we started out,
Mhm.
and tried to say, how can we be different? What can we do that's different from what these channels are doing? Because if we just do exactly what they're doing, then how is anybody ever going to differentiate? What makes us different for them? Let's do something different. And so the main thing we did that was different from them was we put me in front of camera. Most of these channels were just hands in a booth, a disembodied voice talking about the thing. You could literally turn the volume off and watch the video, and it wouldn't make a difference. And we even had people criticize us that way and say, ugh, show the toy more, get this guy off camera. I'm not here for this guy, I'm here for these toys. And it's like, look, if you just want to look at pictures of toys, just go look at Google. Why are you even
Right.
on YouTube? Like, you don't need me for that. So we sort of, that became our thing, that and that was the sort of early trend of it, at least in the toy genre. I'm sure
Mhm.
other genres were doing it already. That wasn't something new that we invented.
Mhm.
And then we just tried to move around and do different things with the format. Yes, technically we were a toy review channel, but we tried to do it different ways. We did versus episodes, this versus this. We did list episodes. Again, we didn't invent any of these things. We just sort of tried to borrow from all these other genres that were doing things that were different from what was going on in
Right.
toys. And that did it set us apart. And eventually just, we grinded for probably the first 6 years,
Mhm.
3 episodes a week, every single week, Tuesday, Friday, Sunday, Tuesday, Friday, Sunday, Tuesday. It just
Yeah.
for years, until we got to a point where we could say, okay, now we can sort of back off a little bit.
Mhm.
We can extend the one show a bit more and focus on this one thing that seems to be really driving our viewership,
Right.
and invest in that. And that was the history of episodes.
Do you have any? I mean, I know they have to be cool, but do you have any specific favorites that really stand out to you? Like you felt like you learned something that you didn't know before?
I learn stuff every single week.
Yeah.
There's been some recently because we spent the first several years covering the things that I was already most comfortable with. Like I already knew a lot about GI Joe and Transformers and Thundercats and all of these Star Wars. All those main properties. It wasn't until we sort of exhausted all of those, and I mean exhausted. Like we've already done 10 different episodes about Thundercats. Okay, we're done. We can't do any more Thundercats. That's it. Like, and we had even redone some of those videos a few times because our style had already, sort of evolved a bit. Um, but so it was when we sort of got beyond that's where we started to get into things that I wasn't familiar with, and I was just starting to learn. And I'll even cite the video we shot this past week. So we shoot on Thursdays, where you and I are talking on a Sunday right now. So this past Thursday,
Mhm.
we shot an episode about the 2004 Battlestar Galactica show.
Okay.
Um, I never watched it. I watched the 70s show when it aired. I watched the first maybe 2 episodes of Galactica 1980.
Mhm.
And then didn't really care that much for it. And so when the 2004 launched, wasn't interested, didn't pay attention, didn't know anything about it. I was good. So this was me, in June of 2024, watching a 20-year-old series for the first time. And I was actually very fascinated by it. It completely was not what I expected it to be in a very good way. And all of it surprised me and was very interesting.
I've had my buddy on. He owns a toy shop, and I want to ask you the same question too. But in your mind, what drives the toy market? Is it like with the comic books, with the movies and TV shows, or is there different factors that sort of decide what's hot and what's not this time?
Yeah. That's still the majority of it. Yeah. The media, the entertainment.
Right.
And there's two different things there. You still have your traditional kids market. Traditionally the toy industry is for like 10 and under, right? Um, the generation that grew up in the late 70s into the 80s into the 90s, that is my age, I'm going to assume probably your age as well.
Yeah.
uh, 30 and up, those kids are still into action figures and
Mhm.
toys and that sort of thing. And so this completely different adult collector market exists now that did not exist back then. There
Mhm.
were still toy collectors, there were still adults who collected toys in 1985. The difference was they were actually collecting toys that were intended for kids.
Mhm.
Now there's a lot more variety of stuff out there that isn't connected to any kind of media that is driving that adult collector market. That those toys don't meet any kind of safety standards for kids. They are not sold to kids. They are not packaged for kids. They have nothing to do with kids.
Mhm.
So that sort of traditional part of the toy industry is still utilizing media as a very important part of their marketing, whether it's the Disney Plus shows,
Mhm.
X-Men 97, Star Wars, whatever, King Kong, Godzilla, all of those things are still very important. And the youngest toys
Mhm.
absolutely are still dependent on that. I'm pretty sure that Mario movie that came out last year sold a lot of toys.
For the vintage market, when they started grading, toys in box and stuff like that, and did that sort of change the game a bit as far as how prices were determined?
I don't know if that had the most impact or just the existence of eBay. The
Okay.
existence of eBay just changed everything, obviously. Like I,
Mhm.
I remember being able to go to flea markets, in the mid 90s, and some old lady was there cleaning out her basement, cleaning out her attic. Her kids were grown up and moved on, and there was just like a blanket or a towel or something thrown down with a bunch of action figures all over it. And you could just go up and be like, "You want like $5 for all of it?" And she'd be like, "Yeah, please, just leave the blanket." And you'd be like, "Yeah, I don't." It's fine. Yeah, I don't want the blanket. But literally, like, 6 months later, as eBay started to become more of a ubiquitous kind of thing, all of a sudden it was, well, hang on, let me check. Let me look up some lists and let me this and all of a sudden you're standing in the middle of a farmland in backwoods, New England, and somebody's looking up eBay prices, and you're like, okay, well, now the whole market is just universal,
Right.
and I might as well be standing in the middle of a store in the mall, because those are the prices I'm going to pay, regardless of the fact that there's a cow right there.
Right. And with stuff like that, people see what prices are people are asking for, but it doesn't mean that's necessarily the prices that they're going to get
Sure.
for it.
Right.
They see like, oh,
Right.
this is someone's asking $100 for this. Yeah, but that doesn't mean they're going to get for it. It could sit there for months on end.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm sure you remember when Wizard magazine was out there and how Wizard affected the prices of things on the secondary market, because you just look it up and you go like, oh well, I have a copy of Amazing Spider-Man 26 or whatever, and this says it's $200, and you're like, well, that's in mint condition. Your book is not mint condition, and they're like, okay, 185 then. You're like, no, what? That's not how it works, but it absolutely, eBay changed the whole game. The CDC pricing and those sort of things, various slabbing of toys or books or whatever.
Mhm.
There's a different market for that,
Right.
but that's not something that has ever affected me as a collector, because I don't care about mint condition. I don't care about packaging or any of that stuff. So
See, and I'm the exact same way. Like the comic books I get, like I'll look for the poor ones, the low grade, because just to have I'm not looking to grade these things. I'm not going to sell them off, but I know, there's some comic shops that if you don't bring something in that's not exactly a
right.
9.0, they want nothing to do with it because it's not worth their time.
Well, and it's tough because at this point, the comics market for individual books, I think, it has changed because there are so many more books out there,
Right.
and there's so many more copies of individual books. When I was buying comics as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old,
Mhm.
there was a comic shop. Like that was it. There was one comic shop, and the idea that anybody would still have a mint condition anything was incredibly rare, and so that really drove that end of the market. Now there's so many books that as soon as it gets to the store, it's in a bag, it's in a board, it's whatever, everything is mint condition. So there's just so many more good condition things out there, and as that older market is starting to sell off the collections that they grew up with,
Mhm.
uh you could not get a comic shop right now to take Liefeld's X-Force #1, like, unless somebody's just like, oh, for a joke, I want to get all the cards, or
Right.
I want to have the most copies of it bagged possible. There literally is no value in those things because they were so overproduced and so many people did save and collect them.
Right.
The Star Wars toy line that came out in 1995, Power of the Force 2, again, you had this generation so excited because vintage, grown up with vintage Star Wars. Star Wars figures hadn't been on the shelves for 10 years. And all of a sudden, here's a new Star Wars toy line. And so everybody's buying up multiples, 3, 5, 7, 10, to put away for the future so they can be millionaires. And it's like, well, that's not how vintage Star Wars figures became valuable. They became valuable because everybody ripped them open, didn't take care of them, played with them, and whatever. And so now they're rare, you
Yes.
know? So it's just the market has completely changed.
And the packaging they do for these toys now, it's all retro. Like they, every G.I. Joe, He-Man, Star Wars, they try to do something different. And folks were just kind of walking by because it's most of the people who are going to pick it up are going to be guys our age. Because, my 8-year-old, I try to say, oh, look, there's a He-Man figure. Well, he doesn't know who He-Man is. He doesn't care.
Nope.
He wants,
Nope.
whatever he sees on TV. So it's us that they're trying to get us to buy these things.
100%. Yep. Yep. And in many cases, they're releasing two different versions of each character at this point. Here's the modern update in modern packaging, and now here's the exact same figure in retro colors with a retro package.
Right. And it's that sort of thing that I got me out of buying new comics is because there are so many variant covers. Like if you're a completionist, your head's going to spin because every time a
Good
book
luck.
comes out this week, there's about 40 or 50 different covers out there.
Yeah.
And, God bless you for trying to track them down, but it's not like these are key issues. It's just a normal issue that they said, hey, let's get a whole bunch of these things out there and see what we can sell.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that my local shop has a few times has had their own, like, for whatever launch book it is, they get their literal exclusive version for their store.
Right.
And so if you're really trying to track down every different variant cover, you have to go to individual stores and say, like reach out to them and see if you can buy a copy direct because that's the only place it's available for sale.
Right. Do you think the Funko Pops and the toys that are out now, 30 or 40 years from now, this generation is going to be grown up, they're going to be trying to recollect them too? Or do you think there's the idea of collecting things has changed in our culture?
Yeah, I think it's changed. I think there will be some stuff. I don't think I don't think physical objects are gonna completely go away as collectible things, but I think the way things are collected now, I think that's going to end with this generation. Um, it's just not something that is being passed down. That generation doesn't want it,
Right.
I liken it to the generation before us, our parents, and more likely our grandparents
Mhm.
um, uh, had a lot of train sets,
Yeah.
collected trains, and they made these model railroads and N scale and HO scale. And my wife and I used to go to a lot of auctions and stuff, about just before we started our channel. So we're talking like, 10, 15 years ago.
Mhm.
And every single auction we would go to, there would just be all of these lots of just trains and train cars and stations and little people and cars and stuff, and you could just scoop that stuff up for pennies. It's just there's no value in it because it's not something that the next generation was interested in. And like you just said, with an 8-year-old right now, most they don't know who He-Man is, they don't care who He-Man is, so
Right.
why would they care about any of these action figures?
Mhm.
I definitely feel like we're in a spot right now where this is a golden era for all of these things, but it's going to end very soon.
Right. And if you're someone who sells toys, or what's an idea to stay ahead of the curve as far as getting them now before the prices start to spike?
Yeah, I'm not sure. When I was a dealer before we started the channel, and I could already sense that transition, just based on what people were selling and what people were looking to buy,
Mhm.
that transition from things that were from the 70s and then now into the 80s, and then things that were from the 80s now into the 90s. And we're, Transformers, Star Wars, some of the GI Joe stuff, some of the Master stuff, that's still got some time to be valuable and for people to collect. But we've already moved into the sort of 90s era where it's the 90s kids who are trying to buy back their childhoods. And those are the things that are really driving, profits and resale values and stuff. So I don't know to what degree that's going to actually cross into the early 2000s.
Right.
We're 20 years out from 2004 right now, and so that's the point at which those kids should be starting to buy back their childhoods. And what was there in 2004? I'm not even sure. I don't know what kids were
Right.
interested in at the time.
But because of that, are you updating your channel as well and moving up years and years and years to the trends that are, hit, like you said, it's going to
We
hit 20.
yeah. Yeah, we kind of dip a toe in here and there to see, but all of our back end data tells us that our audience is primarily over 30, you know. So we still do have to kind of talk to who our audience actually is.
Mhm.
We've done some things that are relatively recent. I think we did our most recent thing, but even that was still tied to a legacy franchise. We recently did Thundercats Roar,
Mhm.
which I think was from 2017, somewhere around there, 2018,
Mhm.
even though it was based on a franchise that, started in the mid 80s. So I still think, whoever was watching that was still the older kids from the 80s who grew up with original Thundercats, as opposed to kids who had never even seen the original Thundercats and were just like, oh, Roar, I forgot about that show. Not really a thing that happens.
Well, what do you think about, I mean, the reboots of the cartoons and the shows of our childhood? Have you enjoyed them, or do you think they're a little off the mark?
I think it's a case by case basis thing.
Mm.
I think the thing that is different for me in my own personal experience is if I don't like them, I just don't watch them.
Right.
It's like there's no part of me that needs to like hop online and write a treatise about why it sucks and who's stupid and how many people should lose their jobs and how it's been driven by some agenda, that's out to destroy my masculinity or something. I just go like, hey, there's like 900 billion other things I could watch right now, or I could just go sit in a room and stare at the wall instead of like venting on the internet. Like, I just don't care, And if it's good, it's like, oh, hey, cool, that was good. Ninja Turtles has their most recent reboot with the Mutant Mayhem thing. What
Mm.
an absolutely brilliant, fun, energetic movie that just, in my mind, completely refreshed that property, and I'm
Mhm.
looking forward to whatever they do. I think there's a full animated series coming out soon here, and I'm looking forward to that. But Transformers, I haven't paid attention to the last like 3-4 decades worth of
Right.
stuff because it doesn't appeal to me that much.
Mhm.
I am a observer of all of it based on what my work is,
Mhm.
so that I know and I am informed about what's happening. But I don't take any of it personally. It's like, oh, did you see the latest Star Wars thing? Yeah. What did you think of it? I liked it. I didn't like it. That's as far as it goes. Like I don't. It's never a life threatening thing for me.
Have you done a show or a topic that you were so surprised that it got as popular as it was, like about a specific toy or a specific cartoon that you didn't think there was that much of an audience for, but more and more people started talking about it?
If you'd have told me at the beginning that one of the things we would most be known for was our Robotech coverage, I that would have been a surprise to me
Right.
because yeah, it's one of those 80s properties and it's in there, but
Mhm.
I never would have thought that that would have been one of the biggest things on our channel that people were just constantly, vehemently passionate about, and that we would have to revisit it so many times, not just because there was more to talk about,
Right.
but because more stuff was happening and people were interested. And every time we put out a video, it did well.
Right.
And unfortunately, I've thereby, against my will, become somewhat of an expert on it, on all the Macross and Robotech, inside and out, the legal side, especially.
Right. I was gonna say it's got to be strange because I'm sure people sometimes come up to you and assume that because you do that episode, you know every single thing about the property and just want to talk to you about it constantly.
Well, there's that. There's the assumption like, oh, you must be a huge fan of all these things. That's why. Because the reality is, most people don't start a YouTube channel or a podcast or anything well, I was going to say because they don't like something, but that's
Right.
not true. Lots of people start podcasts because they don't like something, especially like Star Wars. But that's not, it's very hard to maintain a creative endeavor that is
Mhm.
driven by passion that, for me anyway, is negative. So they assume, and our coverage is always, in a positive way, so they assume we like these things, and in many cases that's true, but in many cases that's not true. We think of ourselves more as like journalists. We are mostly detached from the subject matter and we're just trying to tell the story. And so I think a lot of times people do come in and they expect us to be like, this is the best, coolest thing that ever happened, and if you like it, you're cool too, and whatever else. And we're just like, it lasted 12 episodes, it bombed in the ratings, and then it never happened again.
Right.
And they're like, wait, there's more to the story than that. And I'm like, no, there isn't. That's the end of the story. Uh, and then, yeah, so people expect that, I will be an expert on these things. But the reality is that our production schedule is so fast. We have to turn it around so quickly It's like last week I was an expert on, Superman peanut butter. The week after that, I was an expert on Battlestar Galactica 2004. And next week I got to be an expert on something else. And so if you ask me about what we did 2, 3 weeks ago, it's like, I don't know. We moved on so quickly. I don't know. I forgot we even did that video at this point. That was 2 weeks ago.
I was going to say, because you talk about the grind and just jumping from topic to topic, but you guys do have to keep moving at the speed of light, because if your episode doesn't hit on that day, you're going to hear about it. So you got to keep these things going and going and going.
It's that stupid YouTube algorithm. Nobody understands it. Nobody knows how it works. Nobody knows where they keep it. Like, how do you turn it off? What do you do with it? It's
Mhm.
unpredictable. It's all you can do is just keep grinding. And, Greg is producer Greg is a much more he watches way more YouTube than I do
Mhm.
and has a better sense for what people are doing that is and is not working, and tries to incorporate those things as much as he possibly can. But, some of it you can't do. We're just not that kind of channel. We're not going to suddenly have an episode where it's like a paintball gun war or something, food fight in the living room of a mansion, like it's not our channel. We can't chase those kinds of algorithmic things. So yeah, if we have a episode that's off, that doesn't quite land the way we want it to, well, we got to just turn around and get back into there, because the next one might do twice the views.
Right.
And that's everything we learned early on was YouTube wants you to do the same thing over and over and over again to
Yep.
infinity, especially if you do something that actually attracts an audience and gets views. Like, they want you to just lock into that and never stop doing it.
It's like having a hit single, and then the record company wants you to keep doing this song
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
not.
yeah. You got any more of those? No,
Right.
don't.
What's your long-term goal for the channel?
Right now, we're in a point of just sort of stability,
Mhm.
and that's been very nice. It's not the most views our channel has ever gotten. We're not at the top, we're not at the bottom.
Mhm.
Everything's just kind of like a nice, comfortable, predictable plateau. And that's just a nice place to sort of be right now. It's at the point now where Greg and I have a good enough sense and enough reps with our production schedule that we've started to sort of roll other things that we want to do creatively into our schedule. So for Greg, that means working on screenplay writing, making films, that are not just 12-minute YouTube videos about cartoons. He wants to do actual like movie making. And on my end, I've recently started to dabble in making our own action figures and collaborating with some smaller action figure companies to try to see, is this something I want to do? Is this something I want to pursue? Is this something that our audience would be interested in buying? Do they want to come along on this ride with us? So it's been nice to be able to have that sort of break from the channel each week, even if it's just one day or a day and a half, to be able to start to pursue some other creative endeavors.
I think that'd be awesome. I mean, I see some other companies or people who put out shows or putting out their own figures. I guess they found ways to get the rights to it. But for you, it sounds like that'd be something that'd be so awesome to say, like, yeah, this is a figure we put out.
Yeah, I mean, for years people have asked me like, "Oh, you're such you're action figure collector, even, all these figures and stuff you own. Like, what would you do? What would you do if you could do an action figure line?" And I was like, I don't really have any ideas. Yes, I have comic characters that I've created over the years. I've got some books that I self-published
Mhm.
that are out there. If people want to look for them, they're going to be real hard to find.
Mhm.
Online comics, these sorts of things. And I've showed some of that stuff before.
Mhm.
But I never really thought like, oh, I'm going to try to turn that into actual physical stuff and make action figures, mostly because I know how that process works and I know how long it takes and how much money you have to put in to make something new. It's a 2 year commitment. It's tens of thousands of dollars. And I just did that wasn't something that ever seemed realistic to me. But what happened was we actually ended up we've sort of built these relationships with people who are doing their own independent toys. If you haven't heard of it, there's a sort of kind of engineering for action figures called Glyos,
Okay.
and it's basically just a system of joints that is universal for all these independent collectors. And so you don't have to figure out the engineering for how the shoulder is going to connect to the torso, how the neck is going to connect to the head. You just license Glyos. You work with Matt Dowdy, the creator of Glyos, and You just need to sort of come up with your characters and your designs and stuff. And so Mighty Maniacs, Rocom Toys is a company that did their Mighty Maniacs line.
Mhm.
Jesse DeStasio of Toy Pizza, he's done his Toy Pizza lines of action figures. And so I was like, I know these people. These people are my friends.
Right.
What can we do? Is there something we can do to just kind of figure this out and do a low run and see if people want to follow us? So this year we did release our first SGO1 Secret Gear action figure.
Mhm.
It's a Glios based line of toys.
Mhm.
There was 125 pieces. They sold out immediately, went back for another run. And we actually, so we're recording this on Sunday the 9th. Next weekend, next Sunday, I'm going to be at Toy Pizza Expo,
Mhm.
where I'll be selling the restock of this figure and then the second figure in the line, which is based on a comic book creator character that I created when I was 13 years old.
That's
So that's
awesome.
it's a pretty cool, nice little circle for this conversation we've been having. I drew this guy, created him when I was, in seventh grade.
Mhm.
My friends and I got into making our own comics and that sort of thing. And so this is just a character that's been in my file cabinet, stacks of drawings of this guy over the last 30 years. And then to be able to actually take advantage of these relationships and say, they've already done the work, right? All these molds already exist, all the processes already exist. All I have to do is say, hey, can you make that guy in these colors? And I will give you money.
Right.
And then you send me the finished figures and I'll sell them. And so the whole process went way faster. It was way fewer headaches for me. And it's been fun. And
Right.
so now at this point, I'm saying, okay, maybe I will, maybe there is a path here where I actually start making my own toys from scratch. We'll see.
Could 12-year-old you believe one day you'd be holding an action figure of a character you
I think
created?
I think I probably would have thought it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Okay.
It's definitely something that could realistically, that wouldn't have been an absurd path. That said, it is still very gratifying to be there, and say, hey, that's that guy. That's that guy I
Right.
knew when I was in seventh grade. I sent it to my friend who's also in seventh grade with me, and we've been
Mhm.
friends since then. And I was like, hey, look at this. Isn't this neat? And he was like, that's really neat. And that's like the coolest thing about it. Just being able to sort of share that with someone who was there and knew that character the
Right.
day I did the drawing in my notebook and was like, yeah, isn't this cool? Yeah, it's cool. Look at the one I drew. And now 30 years later, I've got it in hand.
Let me ask you to rate three superhero toy lines that
All right.
we grew up with. I'm going to give you Defenders of the Earth. I'm going to give you Kenner Superpowers, and I'm going to give you Secret Wars. How do you rank them?
Me personally, I would put Secret Wars at the top. I would go Secret Wars 1, Superpowers 2, Defenders of the Earth, like 17. Like way, way at the bottom. I didn't care. Uh, because part of what I like about action figures is the action figures themselves. Like strip the mythology away from them, what the individual characters is.
Mhm.
I've always just been interested in the engineering and the body styles and the sculpting and the paint and the accessories
Right.
and just the thing that an action figure is.
Right.
And I've always been excited to see how things get better. How is it improved? More points of articulation, more
Right.
accurate sculpting. We're doing like digital face printing right now. So Star Wars action figures and Marvel action figures look exactly like the people on screen.
Right.
And so for me, that Defenders of the Earth line was just awful, was just terrible. Even as a kid, I picked up a figure or two and was like, these are not good. I don't like these at all. But superpowers, I
Mhm.
liked good figures, nice action features, that sort of
Mhm.
thing, appropriate accessories.
Right.
The characters looked great.
Mhm.
It always bugged me that they had knees but no elbows, and their arms were kind of locked in that sort
Right.
of punch position, which made them feel shorter. And I'm like, Superman and Batman are like these epic, heroes, and they feel like they have these stubby little T-Rex arms that like this just isn't working for me. And plus, full disclosure, I've always been a make mine Marvel guy. I've been a Marvel zombie forever. DC, what? Don't care. Especially through the 80s at that period. So Secret Wars, even though Superpowers had 10 times as many figures in the line, Secret Wars was my jam because at the end of the day, I did love Spider-Man, I did love Captain America, I did love Wolverine, I did
Mhm.
love Falcon, and that was the only place you were going to get those characters. And I just thought the look of those figures, just the shape of the bodies and the action figure themselves was just so much better. I loved Wolverine's snap-on claws. I loved
Mhm.
just that they did both red and blue Spider-Man and black Spider-Man. I loved that line.
I will say superpowers did come with the comic book though. For a few of the I think about
It
20
did.
figures came with the comic
It
book though.
did. It did. But Marvel's Secret Wars was a way better series.
You had the hologram shield.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the book was being Mike Zeck was illustrating
Oh
that
my
book,
God.
and it was
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's and I know they think they're trying to reboot it again recently, but yeah,
Yeah.
it stands on its own pretty well. Secret Wars 2 kind of, went to the
Yeah.
well once too many times, but the original is just great.
Yeah, no, that issue one cover with just all the Marvel heroes coming sort of straight at
Oh, yeah.
at camera, so to speak.
Mhm.
One of my favorite covers of all time. I think I probably have like 8 or 9 copies of that book because if I'm digging through dollar bins or whatever and I see it, I'm just like, I can't not buy this. It's so that cover is that good that I need to make sure I have one more backup copy of it just in case.
Well, that's the last question I'll ask just because, we met at a toy show, but when you do these shows, do you have time to walk around and, do some shopping for yourself?
It depends. The show that we were at, Shop the Curiosity,
Mhm.
my wife was there with me at the booth, so she was able to keep an eye on the booth while I actually, was able to get a couple instances of walking around. Not nearly as much time as I would have liked.
Right.
So there are times where, you know, I prefer to not be a guest at a show. I prefer not to be like I just want to go as me, just Dan Larson, toy collector, comic book fan, whatever, so I don't have to worry about being on,
Right.
being in my booth, making sure people know where to find me and can find me whenever they need to.
Mhm.
And yeah, just go get elbows deep in a box of whatever,
Yeah.
and look for stuff. It's tough.
And we're back. Yeah, Dan couldn't have been nicer, and so much success for his show, and deservingly so. You can tell the hard work that he and the folks he works with puts into the show. He has talked to us so much about the toy market between him, John Ragusa, Bill Leff. We've really gotten a really great amount of information about what's going on in the toy market today and how it works. So, Dan, thank you so much for joining us. We'd love to have you back, guys. Remember, we have a full slate of shows coming up this week, and get ready because there's going to be a lot more fun coming. So we will talk to you soon.